Hey everybody, welcome to Design Cinema. This is Fengzu speaking, and I got my coffee here, and we're ready to jump into part 2 of science fiction design. So let's sip a coffee and we'll get started. All right, so what's today's episode about? Well, we're going to continue discussing the world of designing for science fiction, and this is really aimed for you guys who are students trying to learn and trying to get into this process and trying to get into sci-fi design. So I'll talk a little bit about behind the scenes and really what we do in the real world to design for these projects. So on the previous episode, I did see some comments regarding that science fiction is just as hard, or maybe fantasy is just as hard or easier, I guess, than science fiction. I think there's a little misunderstanding there, being that both projects are difficult to design for. But science fiction generally takes longer. From my own experience, science fiction always takes longer to design than fantasy. And you can try this yourself as well. For example, give yourself a pretend project of designing for a fantasy RPG. You'll find that you could jump into a project like that much faster because there are a lot of things you cannot go too far away from, which is something we discussed on that last episode. You start with mountains, villages, castles. You're not going to go too wrong, and then you can start exploring from that. But in terms of science fiction, say you have to do a scientific outpost on a planet, and the time is only 20 years from now, so it's just a NASA outpost. It gets much harder to design. And say you move that to 50 years or 100 years in the future, well, there's so many possibilities you could do in terms of design language. So it takes a little bit of time to get that language started. And that's what today's episode really is about. It's like, how do you find that language? How do you get into sci-fi, right? This is something that even from teaching the last, well, how many years have I been teaching? Almost 20 years now. And, from Art Center to Noman to the school I run now, that I do see students that when you give them a fantasy project, they tend to start pretty easily, okay? Because again, you cannot stray too far. But you give them something science fiction, right away they get into generic world, generic spaceships or whatever's popular at that time on the internet tends to become their homework assignment. They're not really thinking about what is science fiction, what is the selling point, and that's what the school is trying to do. So to teach them slowly to do all the things I'm going to talk about today, actually. So let's jump into today's episode versus talking about that type of stuff. So I'm going to go over a few topics. I'll quickly run through them, then we'll go through each one by one. So first is, part two, so where to start, right? One, we got to fall in love with sci-fi. Two, I'm going to talk about the word science fiction. Three, we're going to study from past designers, understand what makes sci-fi cool. Four, how to prepare design docs, or how to prepare styling guides. And number five, define the world. So sorry once again if I'm speaking super fast because I have meetings backed up all the time. So speaking from the real world, we have a couple of science fiction projects in development right now, and they take way more time than some other films that we're on. For example, we're on one that's a little bit more like Tomb Raider, I guess would be the way to put it. A lot more, it's history based, but it has real world locations. It's much easier to handle that versus the other one. It has a little bit of modern sci-fi, like it's believable sci-fi. And man, it takes a long time to get that stuff going because there's so many ways to approach it. So let's jump in. First one, fall in love with science fiction. So if you want to design for sci-fi, again, I'm aiming this for student types, right? If you really like sci-fi, then you have to get into it. And one of the best sources for that are books, okay, or is books, right? How do you say that? The best reason for that is books. Okay, so I put a few of my favorite writers that deals with science fiction and some of their books that I have read, okay? So there are countless classics that you could read. So here are just some of my examples, because books is almost like a secret. They have so much content inside that you could leverage for ideas and for imagination, just tons of it. You never run out. So I always tell our students, man, if you're not running out of ideas, go read a good book. You'll fill your brain and imagination with a ton of cool stuff, man. So for example, I love Jurassic Park. If you haven't read this book, go out, get it, read it. Jurassic Park is an amazing, well-written book. Michael Crichton, Michael Crichton himself has a very good science background, so he writes beautiful science fiction novels. So Jurassic Park, Sphere, right, Prey, Timeline. These are all books that have been turned to film as well. Actually, Westworld, right, the very popular HBO show, that was also the original was written by Michael Crichton. So definitely check him out. He's one of my favorite science fiction writers. I don't call it science fiction. Actually, his stuff is science with a little bit of tech in it, like Jurassic Park. But his stuff is really, really good. Of course, William Gibson, He's very famous for Neuromancer, which is the defining book really for cyberpunk. So if you love that type of world, with cyberpunk being my favorite category for science fiction type of theme, so you got to read William Gibson. His other books like Mona Lisa Overdrive and Count Zero, they're all really good, right? Burning Chrome as well. So, and then of course we have some other ones like Asimov. You can't go wrong with him, the grandfather of science fiction. He's up there with like Ray Bradbury and all these guys, just defining the genre of sci-fi in terms of novels. So The Foundation, I, Robot, I mean the rule that I, Robot governing the robotics, right, is being used by Google, right? The self-driving cars are using the rules defined by Isaac Asimov. You know, they're like, what's number one? Like, don't harm yourself, I think. Number two is like, don't harm humans. And then I think part three is like, don't follow the 1 and 2, you know, follow all rules except for 1 and 2 gets violated, right? Basically, go check it out. It's amazing. Starship Troopers, and of course, Philip K. Dick, which wrote a lot of books that turned into movies like Minority Report, Blade Runner, which this book here is sort of inspired from. So lots of cool stuff out there. Now, for me to get into a science fiction project, I tend to start to read these books first, get myself into the mood. So, for example, when I was working on some fighting games, you know, modern warfare, these type of games, I'll start reading Navy SEAL books and so forth, just to get my mind onto that. So if you're working on sci-fi, get yourself into the mindset, and these books are great. So, but of course, I enjoy lots of books, so science fiction is not the only thing I read. I cannot read all these one after another; it would be overload. So I tend to, you know, read a little bit of science fiction, maybe jump over to like a Cormac McCarthy book, right? Like No Country for Old Men, for example, and then come back to science fiction. Okay. So next is the word science fiction. Okay, you have to love this stuff. The first word in science fiction is science, and it's unbelievable how many times that you're dealing with science fiction stuff that the word science tend to be left out of it. So it's not to say that, oh, you could just make spaceships and do cool stuff, but science plays a big part in selling science fiction. For example, when you're watching The Martian, half the movie is selling science. That's what made the movie sell. When you watch something like Gravity, that's half of it is science as well. It's knowing these things that brings value to science fiction. Even the forms, which we'll get to in a second here, those type of things you have to know, and don't be afraid to geek out. Let me get a pen again so I could write some of this stuff out. Boink. Let me try to slow down a bit, otherwise I can't catch my breath. So don't be afraid to geek out, okay? Geeking out is a good thing. If you like computers, if you like how NASA stuff works, if you like, these are my personal favorites, by the way, here. If you like military type stuff, really learn it well, not only for your visual library, but also for how it works, your knowledge, right? How does a computer work? How does a keyboard work? When you flick a button on an A10 here, what's that clicking like? When you hit a key, what is that press and the reaction press? These are things that sells science fiction. It's these little nuances that your audience get entertained by, right? For example, if you're doing a war sci-fi, how these shells, casings gets loaded into the A10 when it fires and the way it animates. Those are things that when the audience sees it, go, wow, that's pretty cool, right? And to design that, you have to know it first. So here's the Hadron Collider, right, over at CERN. Just an amazing piece of technology. It is really science fiction. Go look at it, go study it, see how it works, and your brain will start to build up an amazing library. So another thing I like to look at is cities and urban environments. To me, a city is like a living beast. Okay. Oh, by the way, I apologize for the pixelated images. I'm on a 4K monitor, so these images brought to this size is totally gonna degrade in quality. So, but anyways, so urban cities. So know how a city works. If you're working on science fiction projects, most likely you will be developing the world, and that has to, a lot of them has the cities in them. So understand how these cities work. What makes it tick? Why are certain cities the way they are? How does a subway system work? For example, right here is Hong Kong. Over here, this is Shanghai. This is Tokyo, right? These are port cities, and they're very well developed. So you gotta ask, why is that, right? For example, I put a little map here of the trading routes the British were using back in the 1700s, and you actually see them coming out of Hong Kong and Shanghai, down into Singapore, over to Jakarta, over into Mumbai, right, down to the Cape of South Africa, up into home base here in Britain, and of course are all over the east coast of the Americas, down into the Bahamas, and they're going down to South America. Here's Sao Paulo, Rio's over here, right, down to Argentina, right? There's all Brazil, Argentina over here. So these port cities then in turn gets developed into mega cities like Hong Kong, Shanghai, right? Jakarta, Singapore, because of trade routes. So when you understand that, you have a basis for the design. So when you're designing a city in maybe in the future or even another planet, you can start from that. It's like, is it a trade route city? Is this where they trade military goods? Or are they trading things like tea and so forth, right? Even for the British, they're trading different things, right? They developed the British East Company to trade spices with the Far East, right? And then tea from Asia and spices and all sorts of goods and things like that. So study those things will really help you understand, right? I put a little example of a city broken down into multiple layers. So you got the upper crust, you got the subway, and all sorts of things going on. So much happening. And for us to design worlds, you have to really understand these worlds, okay? So again, if you guys are working in the industry, this is all repetitive stuff. You don't have to really, you already know this if you're already working in the industry, but for students, you have to really get geeky on this, because if you just expect to go into science fiction and just draw random stuff, you're not going to go very far, because art directors could see right through that your knowledge in terms of science is very low. So you have to get that stuff up. You got to build that imagination and back it up with a lot of real world knowledge. Okay, so another area I like to look at are high-tech products, because this is the forefront of science fiction that already exists. And there are a ton of websites that do these, like Wire magazines and so forth, that showcases just cool products. So I keep a couple bookmarks just to check every few days. I take a look at what else coming out. So I think this is like a heart monitor, blood level, serotonin, whatever this thing monitors, right? Quite cool. Here's a cool Kickstarter project that has a motorcycle helmet that can detect when you're braking. Really cool there, right? A way to grow herbs and plants using NASA technology. Here's a 3D printer. And you could think, how does this apply to science fiction if you're working on a film? Well, many places. Like if I look at that, it's like, hey, that's a great idea. You could print things, right? So maybe in 10 years from now, you just press a button and that product just appears. You don't even have to order anymore. You don't even have to go buy it. You just press a button and that thing prints out maybe in 5 seconds. Who knows? That's something you could do in the film, and that makes the audience get entertained. They'll be like, wow, I wish I had that in my house, So you lose your cell phone or your iPhone, you just press like, Apple, send me another one, or print me another one. And then 10 minutes later, there's a brand new iPhone with a serial number, and you can't resell it and so forth. Whatever technology is, it has it. So looking at real world products is a great source for inspiration. And then moving along here are the natural sciences, right? Don't forget that, science fiction usually are pretty hard stuff, basically hard meaning that the surface is like cars, planets, and so forth. But don't forget the natural part of natural science. So if you're going to deal with spaceships and intergalaxy travels, then know some about space, right? Know your planets, your Milky Ways and Andromeda and all these things, right? All your astrophysics, know something about it, because it's going to help you design. And of course, all your natural things. Like I put this fish here for a reason, the stingray, because this form has been used countless times in spaceship designs, in suits, and video games. I use this quite a bit because it's a beautiful shape, and to know how it works, how it animates, will help you get ideas, right? Here's a little gecko, if you guys just see it, right? Here's a leaf gecko. So it's an amazing animal here that could blend in just using natural camouflage. So from a science fiction point of view, you could be like, that is pretty cool. Maybe I could design an outfit for the military that when they're going to the woods, the outfit could change into whatever's around it, right? Digital camouflage. Boom, you have an idea that gets kickstarted, and that started from nature. So here's a little bat embryo, right? And if you look at that, you got the movies like Aliens and stuff are definitely inspired by a lot of natural phenomena, right? Dealing with the embryos. And here's a ladybug. I just saw this coming out a few days ago about how the ladybug's wings could fold so small, and when it comes out, it's like much bigger than its body, and yet it could still hold the physics required for it to fly, right? It cannot fall apart. So they did a lot of research on how this wing actually folds and how the folds become strength lines once that wing is out. So now the military is looking at this, and as a designer, we could look at it and go, hey, that's cool. We could do a drone, right? Now all the drones are using little helicopter blades, right? Imagine a drone that's very small, you throw in the air, and there's amazing wing folds out, and it could go really far, and then when it comes back, just before it lands, it takes that wing and folds it away. That's a very viable design. And put in a movie, put in a game. Do it before the actual product come on the market, and then you have a pretty cool design in your hands. You're like, hey, I did it a long time ago before, before Apple made theirs or something. So that's something that you can always look, because in films and games, we could create things that are not real, but we could create it in a way that makes it believable. And to do that, to achieve that type of design, is pretty cool to have on your resume. So next one that I really like are material combinations. So I put a bunch of references here because this is something I look at a lot. What I mean by this material combination are how do certain things come together with form language to make beautiful things. I keep hitting this mic with my hat here. Sorry about that. For example, here's a Bugatti, right? They're using chrome materials, leather, plastic, metal, carbon fiber. They're mixing in such a good way that just looks beautiful. Here's architecture has these things. This is a product store up over in Tokyo. Beautiful use of glass and metal and lighting in a way that just looks already science fiction. And these things are basically very, very rich people, because they have no worries about money, are essentially making science fiction because they can make whatever they want in terms of technology push, material push. So I'm looking at things like yachts, private jets. This is actually a private jet here, right? This is a private jet as well. This is a private yacht, a couple more yachts. You look at this stuff, it's like how science fiction it's already done for you. So you don't have to start from scratch. There are many areas to be inspired by already. This already looks like a spaceship to me. And you could use this as a basis. Remember last episode I mentioned that science fiction is hard to find a base? Well, this is how you get it, right? You have to explore. You have to find what you like, what geeks you out, okay? For me, I like this kind of stuff, but maybe you like more of a gritty look, right? Then start from there. Get the language, learn how it works, learn the form languages, learn the materials, and that's going to give you a basis to start your science fiction project. So here's like a seat area. I love these things in airplane seats, right? Like in different classes, right? They all design them differently. Because airplanes are so small in terms of how much space they could give per passenger, they do a lot of good product designs to try to put many functions possible in a small amount of space. So that stuff is all basically science fiction. It's really well done. There's a beautiful little charger station here, all sorts of fun stuff happening. Although I do see a problem here that I don't know if this thing closes up or not. See, now if you're charging, you can't close it. So anyways, let's keep going here. Now the last one in this category is keep looking ahead, but sometimes look back. Okay, so that means is I've been subscribing to Popular Science and Popular Mechanics since I was a tiny little kid. I still read them today because they're just filled with stuff that's essentially science fiction. They're showing you products and all these things I mentioned above in a magazine, laid out for you, edited for you. All the pictures are there, and sometimes 3D models are done for you. So you can look at that and get very inspired. But at the same time, look at things in the past. I love collecting these drawings from a long time ago, like the future according to 1950s, right? Because their vision of the world is very different than what we see today. They couldn't imagine iPhones. They couldn't imagine airplanes, for example. So their solution for like an airship here is a giant balloon with guns on it, right? Because that's the technology limitations of the day. But when you look at that, it's like, hey, that's a cool idea. Maybe I modernize this and make it into a modern design. Or this one here, I love this design here. So you see a subway, right? So it's a train, but the train, after it stops, the buses are like picking up the passengers right by the side of the train. So you can see it right here. This is a great idea. This was probably imagined, I think, in the 1970s, never utilized, but you could put this in a science fiction project. You could put that in a near future scenario, or you could retranslate this into a spaceship. So the mothership lands, or all the troops get in there, and then they just take off in their little fighters without any kind of hallway transitions. You put that in the film, you put that in the game, you're entertaining somebody, right? So, and of course I put the Mars rover here because this is as sci-fi as it gets in today's world, right? We have a robot on another planet as we speak. That is pretty amazing in terms of science fiction. And you can actually follow him on Twitter and see the kind of photos he's taking. So I love this little guy. Every time I look at it, it's like, dude, we are living in science fiction. Okay, moving along here, I'm speaking really fast, is what makes science fiction cool, okay? Be inspired. So don't forget the grades that's come ahead of us. So I put Syd Mead here. There are many designers out there that is worth mentioning, but due to the length of time, I brought in Syd Mead because he is, for us industrial designers, the man that made all this happen for us. Okay, he's the dude that did all of it. So and he did it 40, 50 years ago. So some of you guys who might not recognize Syd Mead definitely probably recognize this style. Where have you seen this? Probably in the game called Mass Effect, right? Mass Effect 1, 2, 3, and the newest Andromeda uses quite a bit of Syd Mead language. You see here. I remember a few years ago, Kotaku ran an article on the art of Syd Mead. I think they ran this about 3-4 years ago. And the comment section was like, hey, this guy's ripping off Mass Effect. And that was a pretty funny comment because a lot of people are like, it's the opposite. Syd Mead did this 40 years ago. So the language that Mass Effect decided to adopt is this kind of 1970s retro look, which personally I like a lot. I love this styling. So, but take a look at his work, Syd, and look at all these old designers. This is Blade Runner art. I'm not sure where this is from, but this looks like the vehicle from the Mass Effect Andromeda vehicle, right? Very similar body styling language, the way the panels work, the way the wheels work. So also get inspired from these designers. So don't copy them, but be inspired, because in the top half here, these are all real things, right? But also look at things that's come before. So of course, look at some movies that inspire you. For me, it's like movies like Blade Runner, Alien, right? This is Interstellar, which did a fantastic job in terms of science fiction. And even movies like Minority Report, which was way ahead of its time in terms of using this UI. We have seen touch screens before, but Minority Report took it to what Apple is today, right? This film came out before the Apple UI was developed. So Tom Cruise here is using the screen to squeeze photos and passing photos along this very slick and digital wall. And then of course, the screen that we use today on the smartphones is pretty much this. So you can see that if you really put time into science fiction design, it could actually become reality. So, and that's, I think, to me, I find that to be super interesting, is to be able to design these things before they hit the market, right? And that requires knowledge and all the things I mentioned earlier. Okay, so you're ready to start, but this is another warning or another advice for students. Don't just jump into speed painters or sketches. Okay, this is very common for student types, like the ones we teach our school. You tell them to do some science fiction, they start drawing spaceships and just generic stuff, spiky mountains and so forth, because they're regurgitating what they see on the internet. That's not design, and you could get away a little bit with things like fantasy. You know what I'm saying? Like you start drawing a dragon, you start to morph it. You could probably get to a solution by doing that. But for science fiction, especially those who require a little bit more challenging designs, it gets much harder. For example, let's just name a random topic. Let's say Apple and Google gets together to build their own private military. Okay, this is a scenario that actually shows up in a lot of movie scripts. Okay, big corporations got lots of money and they're gonna build their own military. You can't just start randomly. You gotta think, what is the design language of Apple? What is the AI technology of Google? How do they use this to build their military? It's probably not going to look like any military of today. They're going to start utilizing, they have all the money in the world. They have all the technology in the world. How do they build their troops? How do they build their vehicles? Is it self-driven tanks? Who knows? What's the color palette? You have to think about it. So if you just go in and start sketching and just draw a generic spaceship, that's not what Apple is going to make. That's not what Google is going to build if that was for reals. And that example is exactly what we do in the real world, right? They're not asking for generic stuff. They want a language. So to do that, find some solid directions first, build some PDFs, build some reference images, and that'll give you a starting point and it'll save you a lot of time later. So you don't doodle around and waste time drawing just generic sci-fi, okay? I actually pulled a couple examples here from real projects that I worked on. To show you that these are the actual references I used to build some of these projects. So I use Call of Duty Advanced Warfare here as an example. So I worked on this, I don't know how many years ago, 4 years ago, I think. So here's the reference I used for their headquarters, for I think the bad guy, what are they called? Atlas or something, right? Some of the reference I used for that. So sorry if I forget the names. I remember in the past some YouTubers were saying, how come you worked on these projects and you don't know the name of the project? It's because when you work on these projects, these games are not called the real names. It's for security reasons. So just in case the concept art gets leaked, the name of the project does not get revealed. So we could not put a Call of Duty on our concept art. We're using, for this project, I think the code name was, it's on the tip of my tongue. What is it called? The guy who pounds metal. I can't remember. If I think of it, I'll let you know. something fire. I can't remember. But anyways, I don't want to waste time on that. But it had a code name. So by the time the game is named Advanced Warfare, I'm way off the project already. You know what I'm saying? I'm like way off of it. So anyways, these are the images I used for the headquarters. Here are the actual images I used for the Lagos chase. So I don't know what it's called in the game, but they wanted a car chase on top of these, and we put these umbrellas everywhere. But these are the actual references. So you start building a visual map, okay? And I start to design from here. For example, I like the patterns here, the lighting, right? So, oh, I remember now. I think the code name was called Blacksmith. I think that was a code name for Call of Duty, Blacksmith. Okay, anyways, so we want to get the urban environment to Lagos, Nigeria, and mix it with very, very modern structures in the back and very modern vehicles on the road. And that was the reference board I put together for that. Here's my own reference board for the interiors of the spaces, like when I think they go to Korea and a couple of locations. We want that tech to look like industrial, clean, very modern, using minimalist design, very slick UI, very slick interfaces, right? And these are the actual ones I got from my library. So I didn't get these just now. You know, I looked through my reference folders of the one I used for Call of Duty and pulled this out so you guys can see a little bit of the reference used. And then what you do is you combine this with all the stuff up here. Okay, all the stuff I mentioned here: urban planning, science knowledge, products, new age things, and natural history. And put all that together and start to mix your own language to develop your own design styling. Okay, and that's what this stuff is all for. So lastly, before I wrap up here, is when you start a science fiction project, define the world first. Okay, don't worry about the costumes too much yet. Don't worry about the little products yet. Get the world defined. At least that's my way of working. I like to get the global stuff first, work from big down to small. Because to me, if I have the city with the world developed, the clothing and the products generally follow a little bit easier. Because if you, for example, you have a very modern looking city, then the clothing is probably be kind of trendy. But if you have a very cyberpunk matrix-like world, it's all dirty, wires everywhere, there's no like daytime, maybe the clothing is a little bit gritty. So I like to start with the world. And here's the references I used. Here's another reference from the real world for the film Valerian, which is coming out pretty soon. So when I talked to Luc about this, right, director Luc Besson here, he wanted a very colorful science fiction film. He didn't want to do a very gritty and kind of monochromatic science fiction world. And the first part I worked on, well, I can't reveal too much because this film is not out yet, but basically in the trailer I put two shots here. This is a shot that I designed here and also designed when they land here. So my first part of the project was to develop that area. What does it look like? And the director had a vision of a very, very noisy area. This is where all the aliens, again, I better not reveal too much because the film is not out. So anyways, I started with New York and I looked at all the crowds because this is a port city. Again, New York, right? One of the port cities, very busy, tons of different people, different races, different ethnics, right? Everyone's getting together here, and that's what I want to capture. And then the caveat I want to throw in there in terms of the selling point, the hook, was the color. That's something the director wanted. So you take this and you just really bring up the saturations, the colors, the greens, the reds, right? So later when the film comes out, hopefully you guys will see that. You're getting a little bit of sneak peek here. So it's kind of like Blade Runner meets everything, you know, you just put all these color in there. So it's just overwhelming the senses, like ton of stuff happening. And because that's what the director wanted for this scene. To capture almost like if you're walking in here, the noise and the sounds you will hear, we want to capture in the film. So, and that's why I got started with that design, okay? So define the world. Once you have that, then we could go in and start picking out the costumes, their materials, their colors, and so forth. Okay, so that's about it for this episode. On next episode, I'm actually going to start showing you guys how we actually approach a design. And I picked a IP based on a book that I read that I love called Old Man's War. If you haven't read it, go check it out. It's a beautiful book. This was actually optioned to become I think a TV show, but I think it was never made. I think Hollywood picked it up as well. It was never made. But I'm going to go through and have myself and my team, we already done the designs. I'll showcase all the thumbnails, the reference boards, and the final designs we did for this pretend project. But keep in mind, we only had a few days to do this because it's not a real project. We did it purely for Design Cinema. So we don't have that many pieces to show, but hopefully we'll have enough to explain this process to you guys. So anyways, I hope you guys found this episode interesting. It was a lot of fun to prepare this. It also gave me a refresher course in terms of like what I need to do better in my line of work, because sometimes you've been working in the industry for a long time, you forget certain things. So I gotta thank you guys as well for keeping Design Cinema going, because I have a lot of fun making these, and I hope you guys continue to watch. So thank you so much, and this is Feng Zhu. I will see you guys in episode 3 of Design for Sci-Fi. Bye bye.